Welcome to Secret Historian, where forgotten kings, lost empires, and hidden histories are retold to help you relax and drift into peaceful sleep. A continent that nearly seems to be outside of our globe is located at the very end of the planet, where maps disappear into a blank expanse of white, buried beneath miles of ice. Antarctica is a landmass larger than Europe that holds secrets that humanity has never fully understood, as if a land was waiting to be found or purposefully kept concealed. The bizarre, empty gap at the far south was left by sailors when they first surveyed the Earth centuries ago. Antarctica is so unique, not only because of its severity, but also because of its eerie silence. No country makes a direct claim to it. It has never been inhabited by native people. Even now, the information that is made public about it always appears to have been carefully chosen and managed. This frozen country has been visited by politicians, scientists, and even influential religious leaders. They hardly ever reveal everything they've witnessed, though. Oddly enough, it became an untouchable zone when a worldwide treaty was signed in 1959, a site where rival nations opted to remain silent even during tense situations. However, why? Why would a species that battles for every square inch of territory and every resource agree to exclude Antarctica from the conquest game? Under that icy white ice that we are not permitted to touch, what is sleeping? And why is this one location impenetrable in a world full of rivalry and ambition? We will be removing those frozen layers tonight on Bedtime History. We'll look at historical maps, relive historic excursions, and explore anything from Cold War secrets to the myth of Atlantis. Every layer of ice is more than just geology, as evidenced by contentious satellite photos and censored scientific publications. It's a part of a bigger picture, a secret tale of strength and reality that humanity has never been prepared to confront. Antarctica was a fantasy before sailing ships ever set foot on the frigid southern seas. For millennia, people thought that in order to balance the northern continents, the Earth needed a huge southern region. This went beyond simple geography. It represented a worldview from antiquity. Like a set of balances held by nature itself, the Earth had to be symmetrical. Terra Australis Incognita, the unidentified southern land, was the enigmatic name they gave this imaginary location. The ancient Greeks' thoughts contain the earliest indications of this concept. The Earth was formerly referred to as a sphere by the philosopher Pythagoras. He also suggested a large landmass in the south as a counterweight to explain why it didn't tilt or tip. It was later depicted on maps by the Roman scholar Claudius Ptolemy as a large region that extended from the southern tip of Africa to Asia. Someone had spotted Terra Australis. Thus, it was absent from those maps. People thought it had to be there. So it was. It wasn't limited to the west either. Nanzhou, a far-off southern region with a climate and soil that are unique to the region, is mentioned in ancient Chinese records. The theory echoed the same human fixation that there must be a hidden continent at the farthest tip of the world, where no one had yet arrived, but it was more legend than fact. Mapundi, or world maps, were frequently strongly shaded in this southern land during the Middle Ages. It was a combination of myth and science. Some maps even embellished it with illustrations of bizarre animals. as though the unknown was being filled with imagination and was a wild place just waiting to be tamed. Terra Australis became a fascination by the 15th and 16th centuries, when exploration was at its height. If they discovered it, explorers thought they would not only redo the map, but also unearth hidden wealth. Reaching the southern frontier was an ambition shared by the English, Portuguese, Spanish, and later the Dutch. Instead, they discovered a scattering of islands and frozen oceans: Tasmania, New Zealand, and Tierra del Fuego. Many quickly affixed fragments to Australia's The Tale of Dread. Antarctica's shadow began to seep into folklore even before anyone had set foot on the continent. Masters of the open sea. Polynesian seafarers described a frigid continent to the south with mist-covered waters and freezing winds. White men from the south, travelers from a far-off cold continent, were mentioned by the Incas in South America. There was never any evidence to support these stories. However, their perseverance led researchers to question if a fragment of truth from a time when the world was still very different could have been maintained in collective memory. Terrorists persisted as European maps became increasingly comprehensive. Instead, it was depicted as the planet's foundation and was significantly bigger, spanning the world from Africa to South America. Explorers didn't realize the southern circle had been drawn excessively large, much of it by sheer invention, until they were getting closer. However, Terra Australis continued to haunt seafarers throughout the 18th century, luring them on dangerous expeditions to discover what was truly at the end of the world. Terra Australis Incognita was ultimately more than a geographical miscalculation. It demonstrated how people have always seen the world in a balanced way and believed in things that must exist even in the absence of evidence. And it was this delusion that inspired bold expeditions. Many lost their lives on these journeys, but they eventually drew back the curtain to reveal a true continent hidden beneath thick, unbreakable ice. The globe started an era of bold expeditions as the legend around Terra Australis Incognita gradually faded. An important turning point occurred in the 18th and 19th centuries when European explorers plunged into the icy waters surrounding the southern pole, driven by pride in their country and individual aspirations. Explorers fought for the privilege of becoming the first to step foot on an unexplored continent, turning what had formerly only been a hazy concept on maps into a battlefield. The pioneers included the British, with their great naval heritage. Captain James Cook made the most southerly expeditions in the 18th century, traversing the Antarctic Circle and documenting countless fields of ice that stretched to the horizon. Cook showed something important, even if he never set foot on the continent. The far south was more than just ocean. A huge landmass was hidden behind the ice. He wrote in his writings that the area was uninhabitable and useless for trade. However, it was precisely this callous disregard that fueled the desire of succeeding generations to overcome it. The actual race had started by the late 19th and early 20th centuries. Planting a flag at the South Pole became a sign of national power for European powers. Above all, three names were prominent: Ernest Shackleton, Scott of Britain, Robert Falcon, and Roald Amundsen of Norway are all renowned more for their valiant failures than for their victories. Amundsen was painstakingly prepared, systematic, and precise. He organized a small, effective team, learned how to utilize dog sleds, and studied Inuit methods. Scott, however, personified British nationality and aristocratic pride, despite being ill-suited for the hostile Antarctic. His expedition's use of motor sledges and Manurian ponies reflected his wish to highlight contemporary technology. The race played out like a scripted tragedy, practical and determined. Amundsen planted the Norwegian flag at the bottom of the world in December 1911 after arriving at the South Pole. When Scott's squad got there a few weeks later, they discovered they had lost. Scott and his soldiers died one by one on the trip back, tired and stranded in blizzards, leaving behind journals full of eerie phrases. Last words to the nation and family. His story is now regarded as a metaphor of humanity's struggle against the edge of the world, not simply one of failure, but also of sacrifice. Then Shackleton appeared. For another reason, survival. His name is inscribed in folklore, even though he never made it to the pole. His crew had to spend months adrift on ice floes after his ship Endurance was stranded and smashed by ice in 1914. Despite all odds, Shackleton and a few men managed to save his entire crew after sailing hundreds of miles across icy waters in search of help. His tale serves as an example of human determination and exceptional leadership. These guys transformed Antarctica from a blank spot on maps into a part of the human story by sacrificing blood, sweat, and even their lives. Nevertheless, a paradox was exposed by the harsh circumstances they encountered. Antarctica came to represent both human triumph and the boundaries we would never be able to fully transcend. Early 20th century excursions brought back more than just documents and journals. They gave science a whole new avenue. A shocking reality surfaced as rare rocks and sediments were extracted from beneath the frozen continent and transported back to labs using drills that sliced deep into the ice. The arid desolation that we currently know as Antarctica was not always that way. It was a verdant, beautiful place with rivers, forests, and even enormous dinosaurs wandering about it millions of years ago. Although the geological evidence is indisputable, the idea of a warm Antarctica may seem implausible. The remnants of old woods lie beneath the ice in thick coal seams. Researchers have discovered enormous ferns, petrified wood, and trees that were once dozens of meters tall. This region formerly had seasons, lengthy days of sunlight, and temperatures warm enough to support a robust ecology, as evidenced by the growth rings that can still be seen in some samples. Not only plants, either. Here, fossilized dinosaurs have also been discovered. Predators adapted to months of darkness, and massive planters stretched across the forests. These findings compelled scientists to pose a more significant query. What caused a once-living land to turn into a realm of perpetual ice? According to climate models, Antarctica moved southward as tectonic plates moved, was isolated from the warmth of the equator by the development of the Antarctic circumpolar current, a whirling belt of frigid water. The environment gradually cooled, and ice started to take hold. Oddly enough, though, the process wasn't always linear. Even after Antarctica had established itself in the South Pole, some fossils reveal warm periods, evidence of a sudden change in Earth's climate in the past that we still find difficult to explain. Were these merely cycles of nature or indications of forces beyond our current comprehension? The miles-thick ice sheet of today conceals a myriad of secrets beneath it. According to radar scans, whole fossilized trees might still exist, sealed off like a time machine. They might one day be discovered and provide insight into the biological history, as well as how this planet dealt with and adjusted to severe climatic change. However, indications of life are not the only things preserved by the ice. The atmosphere itself is preserved. Tiny air bubbles, stored for hundreds of thousands of years, are discovered by scientists in 10-meter-long ice cores. We have created a timeline of Earth's climate by examining them. Sea levels rose, ice melted, and the world warmed. ASCO levels increased. The ice moved forward once more when CO dropped. Like the Earth's sluggish breathing, the cycle repeats again, and the secret to releasing that breath lies in Antarctica, along with old air, dust from far-off deserts, pollen from long-extinct plants, and even ash from intense volcanic eruptions can be found inside the ice. When you put them all together, you'll see that the story is not unique to Antarctica. Is the world's entire history. This is the contradiction, though. The barrier that prevents us from reading the most comprehensive archive we possess is the ice. Today's knowledge is just the tip of the iceberg. History stretches back millions of years. Maybe that's why Antarctica seems like a library that has been locked. There is valuable literature and environmental and climatic records inside. But we have to flip the pages slowly and carefully in order to read them. There's no hurrying or pressuring, and Antarctica seems to be whispering in that icy calm this planet remembers. Only those who are humble enough to listen may uncover its past. Even though contemporary science maintains that Antarctica has been frozen for millions of years, one artifact raises a challenging issue. Ottoman Admiral Piri drew this map of the Piri Race in 1513. Not only is the map remarkably detailed for its time, but it also appears to show an ice-free Antarctic coastline. Piri was not a typical person. He was a scholar, a good navigator, and a man whole-learned from a variety of sources. He stated in the notes that came with his map that it was assembled from roughly 20 previous maps, some of which were Greek and Arabic, and even dated back to Columbus. Researchers were startled to see that the shoreline in the southern part of his image remarkably resembles the current configuration of Antarctica, which is open land rather than covered in ice. Many people are in disbelief when they compare the Piri Race map to contemporary geological surveys. Certain features are nearly identical to the actual shoreline of Antarctica, which was only discovered in the 20th century by ice-penetrating radar. The land's shape, beneath thousands of meters of ice, is remarkably similar to what Piri depicted more than 500 years ago. So, the question is, how could an admiral from the 16th century map a place that would not be formally seen by humans until the 19th century? Numerous hypotheses have been put forth. Some claim that what we see isn't actually Antarctica at all, and that the Piri Race just misassembled sections of South America. However, when some coastline features match up nearly exactly with current data, this theory breaks down. According to a different possibility, his map might have been a copy of far older materials, possibly artifacts from a civilization that predated Antarctica's ice seal. If accurate, it would indicate that humankind once had significantly more geographic and seafaring knowledge than is documented throughout history. Mainstream academics are still wary. They propose that the Piri-Reis map might be a hazy recollection of Antarctica's past tens of thousands of years, when there may have been periods with less ice. The exact similarity, however, continues to pique interest. Why does it align so closely, even when viewed by contemporary radar, if it was merely a coincidence? The fact that the Piri-Reis map is not unique adds to the intrigue. A southern continent is also seen on other 16th and 17th century maps, sometimes connected to South America and other times distinct. It appears that even before it was ever verified, a ghost of the southern country lingered in human geographic memory. Is it possible that these maps are pieces of a forgotten body of information that was handed down through the generations before ending up in Piri-Reis's possession? The map has been a topic of discussion for ages. It is seen by wary scholars as an awkward oddity, a piece of a puzzle that doesn't fit cleanly into the canon of history. Alternative scholars see it as evidence of extinct civilisations, highly developed societies whose knowledge disappeared but was preserved in artifacts. Additionally, it represents a perennial query to the general population. Are we really aware of the entire history of our planet? The Piri-Reis map is more of a gateway to countless theories ranging from myth to science than a relic. By doing this, it presents Antarctica in a whole new way, not just as a frozen wasteland, but also as a place that might contain the remnants of a whole civilization that has been lost to the ice. It's difficult to believe that Antarctica was once connected to numerous other regions when we view it as a huge block of ice isolated in the chilly ocean. However, an astounding reality is revealed by geological maps and the notion of plate tectonics. Notable of Antarctica was isolated. It was formerly a part of the vast landmass known as the Great Supercontinent, which comprised Madagascar, Africa, India, Australia, and South America. Imagine what the Earth looked like 180 million years ago. The world didn't look like it does now. Giant land masses were merged together rather than existing as distinct continents. Laurasia is in the north, and Gondwana is in the south. At this point, Antarctica was not yet locked at the pole. It was united to verdant, lush areas nearer the equator. Because of this link, life was able to easily spread throughout different areas, forming an ecosystem that extended from Africa to the southernmost point of the globe. Deep in Antarctica, Gondwana's fingerprints can still be seen. The geological formations of the Transantarctic Mountains, which span thousands of kilometers, are similar to those of the Indian and South African ranges. Antarctica's coal seams, iron deposits, and ancient igneous rocks are comparable to those in Australia and Brazil. These parallel edges are what geologists refer to as proof that the continents were once one cohesive unit. In phases, Gondwana disintegrated as the plates started to move. India broke off and raced northward around 120 million years ago, eventually colliding with Eurasia to form the Himalayas. Coastlines that still fit like fragments of a broken vase were left behind when South America and Africa split apart about 100 million years ago. When the Antarctic circumpolar current originated approximately 34 million years ago, Antarctica moved towards the South Pole and became completely isolated, a ring of chilly water that totally severed it, the continent. was plunged into an unending ice age after that. Theglasopterus fossil, a massive fern that formerly flourished in thick woods over Thespian continent, is among the most compelling pieces of evidence connecting Gondwana. Glossopterus fossils have been discovered in Antarctica, Australia, South Africa, and India. The once ludicrous hypothesis of continental drift was eventually accepted by 19th-century scientists thanks to these discoveries. One of the most compelling pieces of evidence of Earth's united origin is the picture of a single plant species spread across continents thousands of miles apart. There is more to the geological idea of Gondwana. It serves as a reminder that the history of Earth is a vast epic of change. There is no permanent repair for any continent. Like enormous icebergs, they all drift, collide, and disintegrate, afloat in an endless ocean. Today's Antarctica is just one part of that tale, a chapter on loneliness, cold, and separation. However, prior to that, it was intimately associated with areas that are today inhabited. This picture is further enhanced by recent investigations into the bedrock of Antarctica. Massive fracture systems, secret mineral veins, and mountain ranges buried under ice show that Antarctica continues to be strategically important to the world's narrative. The mineral riches that were created in Gondwana remained. They are still trapped beneath the ice, their secrets silently awaiting discovery. In the context of Gondwana, Antarctica's current isolation is but a fleeting episode in a much longer history. Before the shifting plates of the Earth tore it apart, it was a part of a familiar world where life moved and flourished. Antarctica feels both near and far away because of that memory. It was once ours, but it is now locked away. A freezing secret place out of our grasp. A fresh chapter is opened by contemporary discoveries. If Gondwana is the story of Antarctica's remote past, Antarctica conceals an underground biosphere that is nevertheless teeming with life behind kilometers of ice. For millions of years, the planet was walled off, where ancient bacteria continue to thrive in circumstances that shouldn't be possible. Rivers still flow, and enormous lakes silently persist. Lake Vostok is the most well-known of these finds. One of the biggest freshwater lakes on Earth, Lake Vostok is 3 times the size of Lake Ontario in North America and is buried behind more than 4 kilometers of ice. The fact that it has been isolated from the atmosphere for at least 15 million years is what makes it remarkable. This indicates that any life that exists there has developed separately, cut off from the rest of the planet. Russian scientists found evidence of bacteria that were previously unknown to science when they dug down and collected the first water samples. These microscopic organisms seem to have evolved to live in a methane-rich, dark, high-pressure environment that was uncannily similar to locations we think to be distant from Earth. Hundreds of other subglacial lakes have been discovered by satellite and ice-penetrating radar equipment, all of which are connected by an extensive system of rivers that run beneath the ice. Water, minerals, and even microorganisms are transported through the icy underworld by some of these rivers, which can reach hundreds of km. This finding fundamentally changes how we think about Antarctica. It is a dynamic, intricate, and hidden system that is subtly active beneath its frozen surface, rather than a dead block of ice. This poses important queries. What prevents life from existing in harsh environments elsewhere if it can endure millions of years in complete darkness? without sunshine, and without any touch with the outside world, beneath the ice of Saturn's moon Enceladus or Jupiter's moon Europa. Antarctica thus turns into a natural laboratory that gives people a peek at the potential for extraterrestrial life. But more inspiring than science is what's beneath the ice. It encourages conjecture. Who can be positive that only bacteria exist in huge ecosystems that have been locked off for so long? More complicated living forms, or even remnants of extinct civilizations, may be hidden beneath the ice, according to some theories. These theories are disproved by mainstream science, yet they continue to linger in the popular consciousness, particularly when odd, inexplicable radar readings suggest that there are odd structures beneath the surface. There is no denying one fact. Earth's memory vaults are these enclosed spaces. In a manner that is nearly unmatched elsewhere, they maintain the climate, wildlife, and geology of millions of years ago, unaltered and pure. However, that very purity has also made Antarctica a contentious area. Some places are off limits because they must be completely unaltered, not because we don't have the technology. This makes sense from a scientific perspective, but it also raises questions and encourages conspiracy theories about what might actually be concealed there. We can only read a few words at a time from Antarctica, which feels like a locked journal deep under its ice. Additionally, our mind fills in the gaps more when we are given fewer details. For this reason, Antarctica is part of myth as much as science. Some regard it as a gateway to a hidden world, the shadow of Atlantis, or fallen gods, while scientists look for signs of previous temperatures. Our imagination is expanded when we consider the hidden lakes and ancient microbes that lie beneath the ice of Antarctica. Could Antarctica itself be the lost home of the greatest civilization in myth, Atlantis? If so much is still hidden beneath the icy surface, the geographer Charles Hapgood developed one of the most controversial hypotheses regarding Antarctica throughout the 20th century. Hapgood suggested something far more daring than merely looking at ancient maps for solutions. That a continent may have slipped from a temperate zone to the freezing South Pole as a result of a quick alteration in the Earth's crust. And Atlantis, a thriving civilization, was buried under perpetual ice during that terrible exodus. This concept was dubbed Earth crust displacement by him. Hapgood contended that Earth's thin outer shell may slide all at once over the softer mantle below, moving thousands of kilometers in what would be a brief instant in geological time, in contrast to Alfred Wegener's slow hypothesis of continental drift. Lands with pleasant climates might be abruptly thrown into Arctic temperatures if such a transition took place. An entire civilization might be destroyed by such a cataclysmic change. Hapgood contended in his 1966 book, Maps of the Ancient Sea, Kings, that Antarctica existed before the ice, not Atlantis, a fabled land engulfed by the ocean, as Plato claimed. He thought that the continent moved from a temperate latitude to the South Pole some 12,000 years ago, as a result of a shift in the Earth's crust, while shards of its memory persisted in stories all around the world under the name Atlantis. Any civilization that had flourished there would have been annihilated by the abrupt freezing. Although the notion generated a lot of controversy, many people found it fascinating. Hapgood's theory, according to some academics, may help to explain why so many cultures have stories about a lost land in the deep south. Additionally, it appeared to support scientific findings that regions of Antarctica had previously experienced exceptionally warm temperatures. The fact that his proposal came towards the conclusion of the last ice age, when sea levels increased sharply, made it much more convincing even in the absence of concrete archaeological evidence. Most surprisingly, Hapgood wasn't by himself. In a foreword to one of Hapgood's writings, Albert Einstein acknowledged that the idea was worthwhile, since it provided a novel perspective on how the Earth was changing. Even though Einstein never ruled Hapgood accurate, the scientific community took notice of him because of his cautious backing. Since the Earth crust displacement theory contradicts the accepted data of plate tectonics, it was naturally rejected by the majority of contemporary geologists. However, the Atlantis-Antarctica notion has persisted in popular culture, as well as among alternative researchers. It presents a spooky picture of a highly developed civilization that was virtually completely destroyed, leaving only weak remnants in the collective memory of humanity. Whether Hapgood's thesis is correct or incorrect may not be its greatest strength, rather. It is the question it compels us to consider. Is there a whole period of human history that we are missing? How many civilizations might have been wiped out and reduced to legend if there had been significant geological shifts in the past? Antarctica, a continent encased in ice, like a gigantic coffin containing the relics of a vanished world, therefore becomes a metaphor of amnesia. The question of whether Hapgood was right or wrong remains unanswered by his theory. Could the legend of Atlantis just be buried beneath those miles of ice, just waiting to be discovered? Humanity's tales seem like relics from a much more ancient past. If Hapgood's hypothesis of Atlantis in Antarctica was just one audacious answer, sounds of a common memory of a place in the south. It's remarkable that tales of a far-off place that went beyond human reach can be found everywhere, from South America to Polynesia to the Mediterranean. Is this an isolateness? According to the Incore of the Andes, strange entities, known as white men from the south, appeared out of a frozen country and were often referred to as knowledge bearers. They allegedly taught building and agriculture before going missing following a significant calamity. The Tele tribe of rural Patagonia told stories about pale-skinned giants twice as tall as average people who lived in the icy reaches of the world. Stories of the Patagonian giants were also documented by European explorers upon their arrival in the 16th century. As though legend and fact had suddenly collided, several sailors even reported seeing towering beings on the untamed beaches. Curiously, many of these legends predate European settlers' arrival in South America, which undermines the credibility of the notion that they were merely exaggerations of encounters with taller foreigners. It's possible that the ice giants served as personifications of theglaciers and the icy winds that blew in from the south. However, it's also likely that these were hazy recollections of past interactions with long-gone groups of people, leaving only myth. Polynesia's master navigators narrated tales of Hawaii, a mystical land in the far south that they thought was the birthplace of their forefathers across the Pacific. They believed that Hawaii was a shared homeland, a land that had once been but had vanished, as well as the location where souls return after death. Despite the fact that many academics view Hawaii as a cultural metaphor, The parallels between the Patagonian and Inca tales point to a more profound collective memory. Geographers like Tommy and Strauss conjectured that a huge southern continent, Terra Australis, was required to maintain the Earth's equilibrium, even in the Greek world, where Plato wrote of Atlantis. This concept persisted in medieval maps, which depicted how the idea of a land no one had ever seen plagued both the East and the West. Many cultures viewed the giants, or creatures from another world, as semi-divine entities that inspired both dread and awe rather than as foes. The design reflects the Atlantis tale itself and is frequently recalled as knowledge bearers. A highly developed civilization was destroyed, but only subtle remnants were left. Giants are frequently used in human culture as a reminder of a time when the world was inhabited by more powerful forces. The biblical Nephilim, the Greek Titans, and the enormous characters from Polynesian mythology. One characteristic unites them all. They are from a previous world that was wiped out to create space for people. Antarctica starts to resemble the stage where these collective memories come together when South American, Polynesian, and Mediterranean legends are read together. These stories may be more significant for their peculiar harmony than for their literal accuracy. The Mediterranean and medieval Europe, as well as South America and Oceania, appear to have a common memory of a southern region, lost, eerie, and far away. And because of this imagination, Antarctica has changed from a dead block of ice to a living representation of terror, AOW, and the never-ending human desire to explore. It leads to the ultimate question, but it doesn't provide us with a definitive response. Could the echoes of a bygone era still be heard beneath the ice? The plot moves to the present after the South American giant legends. Today, with satellites and the internet, Antarctica is more than just a fantasy land. The entire globe may see this open canvas. Ironically, though, the more pictures we have, the more profound the puzzles appear to become. Strange shapes emerge in millions of satellite images, raising the question of whether Antarctica is concealing evidence of man-made structures, or if light, shadows, and ice are deceiving us. The so-called Antarctic Pyramid is among the most well-known examples. A structure with sharp edges, triangular sides, and a pointy peak rising above the infinite white is visible in circulating satellite photographs. It resembles a huge pyramid from a distance, as though it was constructed by hand or perhaps by a vanished civilization. Theramers immediately got out of hand. Some said it was a covert government base in plain sight, while others connected it to Atlantis or aliens. A more straightforward answer was provided by mainstream scientists. They claimed it was merely Anunnaic. In their view, the pyramid image was only an example of Pheradalia, which is the brain's propensity to recognize faces in clouds and transform random forms into something. However, the mania could not be stopped by reason alone. The images became part of a digital legend after being shared on social media and altered, zoomed in on, and annotated. Millions of people watched the Antarctic Pyramid recordings, which raised the question, why is the government silent? Why is that location off limits to visitors? Ironically, the mystery was heightened by the very stillness, and there were other anomalies besides the pyramid. Other satellite photos revealed black lines that appeared to be tunnels, odd apertures leading underground, or rectangular shadows carved into the ice. Some were later identified as errors in the image processing or as natural shadows. They became evidence of underground bases and unidentified constructions buried beneath the ice. However, for those who think Antarctica conceals secrets, whether or not these pictures are accurate is not what gives them their force. It's in the way they pique interest. Almost everyone is already prohibited from visiting Antarctica. Therefore, any oddity serves as inspiration. A shadowy area can transform into a grand entrance or a jagged peak that leads to an old pyramid. Therefore, the more important question still stands. Are we just deceiving ourselves with skewed images? Or is there really something hidden under the ice? Although science provides logical explanations, the idea that Antarctica is more than we now understand cannot be dispelled, and modern tales find their lasting existence in this space between what science can explain and what people wish to believe. The human imagination goes even farther than frozen pyramids sculpted by snow and stone. Could Antarctica itself be a doorway to another universe if those odd pictures truly do allude to something hidden? According to certain hypotheses, there are portals to a subterranean realm located deep beneath the continent. This realm is known by a variety of names in legend, ranging from Hollow Earth to Agartha. A few European intellectuals first proposed the Hollow Earth theory in the 17th century, speculating that the Earth might have several inner shells with large open areas inside. The concept eventually shifted from science to contemporary mythology. It's interesting to note how frequently Antarctica appears in these stories, as though this isolated region was picked as the ideal mask to hide a more significant reality. Agartha is a magical underground planet that is thought to be home to advanced beings or civilisations that exist parallel to humanity but are concealed from the surface. This idea is associated with some of the most well-known myths, faiths ranging from Tibetan Buddhism to Hinduism, speak about subterranean cities or underground regions where people can find immortality, enlightenment, and wisdom. The notion that Agartha would be reachable through portals at the North and South Poles was stoked by these beliefs when they blended with the frozen image of Antarctica. The legends surrounding Admiral Richard Byrd, the American explorer who made history in the 20th century by flying over both poles, only served to reinforce that view. Byrd claimed to have seen a verdant land with a weird sunshine and enigmatic creatures beyond the Antarctic ice. According to unauthorized materials allegedly taken from his hidden diary, these records have been sufficient to firmly establish Earth in Antarctic mythology, despite the fact that the majority of historians reject them as fakes. One thing is indisputable when it comes to fact and fiction. Legends about the subsurface world flourish in Antarctica. Miles of thick ice, undiscovered ice caverns, flight restrictions, and places that are off limits to research. It all contributes to the feeling that something is being hidden. Furthermore, many believers' convictions get stronger the more strongly mainstream science rejects it. Despite being myths, Hollow Earth and Agartha have a deeper meaning. Humanity's inability to acknowledge that all of the planet's mysteries have already been resolved. To maintain our interest, we require the notion of an uncharted territory, a secret gateway to a different universe. And Antarctica has turned into the ideal representation of that belief in its icy silence. The history of Antarctica then enters a new chapter. It was a major cause of political unrest in the 20th century and was no longer merely a myth or conjecture. Antarctica ceased to be a forgotten continent as empires competed for control of territory and power. It became a pawn on the geopolitical chessboard, a site where secrets were protected by diplomacy and military might, in addition to being encased in myth. And it all started with Nazi Germany, a name that still evokes fear. Hitler's government dispatched a German Navy-led mission to Antarctica in 1938, using the cruiser. The official objective was to hunt for new whaling grounds, which at the time were a crucial supply of oil, and to carry out aerial surveys in order to increase economic power. Documents and rumors, however, indicate that the Nazis had a more ambitious plan behind that apparent objective: to lay claim to a portion of Antarctica and build a covert military installation. The area they investigated was called Queen Maud Land's Neuschwabenland. The team flew across the ice for several months, making precise maps, dropping flags to designate territory, and capturing thousands of aerial photos. Other countries were uneasy about the move, since it was a great fit with Nazi Germany's aggressive expansionist plans that were already being implemented throughout Europe. The absence of reliable information regarding this trip following the war created a void that was soon occupied by irrational theories. Many grew to suspect that the Nazis had established covert underground facilities beneath the Antarctic ice. Rather than merely scouting weirich seas, according to some accounts, they tried flying disc technology, built enormous bunkers, and experimented with cutting-edge weapons, concepts that were decades ahead of their time. The idea that the Nazis found anything remarkable in Antarctica is among the most widely held ideas. Perhaps the remains of a Longines civilization, perhaps an underworld entrance, similar to that found in Hollow Earth law, or maybe just a covert stronghold to regain control after losing in Europe. Rumors that U-boat snuck away to the southernmost oceans and reports of missing German officers after 1945 served to further fuel these myths. Naturally, mainstream historians deny these assertions. They contend that there is no solid proof that Nazi bases were ever established in Antarctica. Rather than being a real military station, they view New Swabia as more symbolic, a propaganda-driven mission to solidify Germany's position on the international scene. Nevertheless, it is difficult to overlook the extent to which Antarctica became the ideal setting for conspiracy and fantasy due to the Nazis' fascination with mysticism, which extended from Thule to Atlantis. Furthermore, the secrecy surrounding New Swabia after 1945 only served to increase mistrust. Why did so many records remain limited if it was merely a normal expedition? Why are there dozens of fringe books and narratives that repeatedly mention secret Nazi bases? Perhaps most provocatively, why would the United States abruptly begin Operation High Jump, one of the biggest military operations in Antarctic history, only a few years later? The world saw something much stranger just a year after World War II ended, if the tale of New Swabia is still shrouded in conjecture. Operation High Jump, one of the biggest military operations in history, was initiated by the United States in Antarctica. The topic of why a frozen, seemingly worthless continent would need a full-scale military presence was quickly brought up by its enormous scope. One of America's most well-known explorers, Admiral Richard E. Byrd, conducted Operation High Jump, which took place between August 1946 and February 1947. The stated objectives were simple, on paper: to carry out scientific research, test equipment, and train soldiers in bitter cold. On the other hand, it was evident from the scale that this was not just a military drill. The operation used a force similar to actual warfare campaigns, with roughly 4,700 soldiers, 13 ships, and 33 aircraft deployed. They included warships, aircraft carriers, and even submarines. It's difficult to accept that all of that was done merely for cold weather practice. According to certain documents, the United States also imported a lot of aerial photography equipment with the goal of mapping Antarctica in its entirety. The timing just served to heighten the mystery. The procedure, which was supposed to last 6 to 8 months, concludes in less than 2. Many found the official explanation of severe weather and logistical challenges to be unconvincing. Why would a strong, well-equipped military force suddenly disband and flee? Speculation swiftly filled that informational vacuum. According to one of the most widely accepted ideas, the U.S. fleet was actually sent to search for a covert Nazi base, buried beneath the Antarctic ice, where German scientists and other regime members may have escaped after Berlin fell. According to other accounts, the Americans were forced to retreat after coming upon flying discs, experimental weapons, or even sophisticated technology. Unusual comments ascribed to Admiral Byrd himself helped the notion gain traction. He reportedly warned that America should be ready for the prospect of being attacked by flying things that can move from pole to pole at amazing rates in an interview with South American reporters following the operation. Decades of conjecture about what birds actually observed in Antarctica were fueled by these claims, even though they were never verified in official records. A much more pragmatic answer is provided by mainstream historians. In order to secure the polar areas, test its global reach, and get ready for the Cold War. They contend that high jumping was a component of America's post-war attempt to establish itself as a superpower, particularly when transpolar aircraft routes were being investigated. A thorough mapping of Antarctica was strategically and scientifically valuable, according to this viewpoint. The early retreat was not a covert conflict, but rather a reflection of the harsh conditions in Antarctica. Still, high jumping's legacy endures. Why send a force of that size on a research expedition? Why do official accounts and the bird's purported remarks conflict? And why would one of the biggest military expeditions of the post-war era suddenly target Antarctica, a region long thought to have no significance? Operation High Jump became the ideal link between the later political mysteries of Antarctica and the Nazi Schwabenland mythology because of these unresolved issues. And when Admiral Byrd emerged as the main character, the statements ascribed to him, whether accurate or not, opened a new avenue to a huge continent outside the pole, a place that seemed to imply a different world from the one we believed to exist on Earth. Byrd cautioned that the United States must be on guard against the prospect of an attack by flying things that may go from pole to pole at extraordinary speeds in an interview he gave in 1947, according to South American publications. In the years following World War II, the statement created a stir right away. He was even mentioned in some publications as stating that there was an uncharted, large, lush area of land beyond the southern pole. The written account's veracity was later questioned by scholars, but by that time the words had become part of the expanding corpus of Antarctic folklore. What is said to be Byrd's hidden notebook also contributed to the idea. This contentious story claims that during his polar flights, Byrd documented odd encounters in which he reported seeing peculiar creatures and green volleys, and even contacting more advanced beings than humans. According to a frequently cited passage, Byrd said that his plane was taken under control and flown into an ice-free area, where he came into contact with people from the inside Earth. Naturally, theory was rejected as a hoax by both academic and military historians in the United States. In the public's mind, however, it proved Antarctica's secrets and the hollow Earth theory. This is made even more interesting by the fact that Byrd's career alone raises questions, even in the absence of the contested documents. He saw previously unexplored areas firsthand as one of the first pilots to fly over both the North and South Poles. His flights captured images and observations of regions that were not completely encased in ice, along with odd weather occurrences. Perhaps these encounters were what gave his writings their eerie quality, as they came from a guy who had actually witnessed things that few others could ever imagine, rather than merely from fancy. Some contemporary scholars contend that Byrd's warning concerning high-speed flying craft was merely a metaphor for new Cold War technology, and that he was only referring to uncharted areas of Antarctica along the coast where ice had receded to show parched valleys. However, his ambiguous wording and dramatic newspaper articles gave his statements a life of their own and turned them into fodder for the notion that there is a secret world beneath the ice. Byrd was a sort of messenger for vast conceptions of the hollow Earth, Agartha, and lost civilizations hidden at the bottom of Theath. But we may never know what he really meant or how much the press exaggerated his claims. Following Admiral Odd remarks, Antarctica gradually transitioned from the era of bold expeditions to a brand new era of international politics and diplomacy. The Antarctic Treaty, which was drafted in 1959 and is still regarded by many as one of the most peculiar agreements of the 20th century, was the most obvious indication of that change. The world was ensnared in the most perilous years of the Cold War. Throughout the 1950s, there were conflicts between the US and the USSR on many fronts: space exploration, nuclear weapons, and political clout. In the midst of this worldwide impasse, however, an almost miraculous event occurred. Antarctica would belong to no one. Both parties agreed. 12 countries, including the US, USSR, UK, France, Japan, Australia, and Norway, signed the Antarctic Treaty in Washington, D.C. on December 1st, 1959. A few fundamental ideas were outlined in the pact. Only peaceful uses would be made of the entire continent. All military operations were absolutely prohibited. Open dissemination of the findings was required, and scientific research was promoted. Radioactive waste disposal and nuclear testing were prohibited. All current territorial claims were frozen and set aside indefinitely, and no nation was allowed to make new ones. The degree of consensus was what made the treaty so peculiar. Antarctica was abruptly removed from the equation in a world where territorial disputes were nearly invariably the cause of conflict. Because of this, many observers questioned why the superpowers would voluntarily cede a continent twice as large as Australia, which may have enormous resources hidden beneath its ice. Were they aware of anything that the rest of the world was unaware of? According to some historians, the solution is straightforward. With the Cold War already using up so many resources, no one wanted to invest money and men in such a hostile, difficult-to-control region. According to this perspective, the pact served only as a means of preventing the creation of a new front. But such an explanation seems too flimsy to others who think there are deeper secrets. They contend that the treaty was actually a front used by superpowers to conceal the reality about Antarctica. When people saw the treaty's stringent access restrictions, their suspicions only grew, regardless of whether that meant hidden bases, ancient ruins, or something far stranger. Special permission was required for anybody wishing to survey, explore, or simply conduct research on the continent. Under the guise of environmental protection, vast tracts of land were blocked off. There were no commercial flights permitted. Only in strictly regulated areas may even scientists work. This degree of restriction didn't seem like openness to many. It appeared to be intentional control. Conspiracy theories took off from there. According to others, the purpose of the treaty was to prevent the world from learning of archaeological discoveries that could change the course of history. Others think it was done to conceal covert military installations, possibly the remains of Nazi Germany or brand new Cold War facilities constructed by the superpowers themselves. Of course, some people assert that the true goal was to prevent the general public from seeing proof of extraterrestrial life or UFOs. There is one thing that cannot be denied, regardless of the reality. One of the most fruitful diplomatic pacts in contemporary history is the Antarctic Treaty. It remains in force almost 60 years later, and more countries have joined. Antarctica has emerged as the sole region free of borders, troops, and war in a world characterized by strife. However, it is precisely this complete tranquility that sustains the doubts, the impression that what appears to be calm could actually be as skillfully managed, quiet, with no military presence and no territorial issues. The Antarctic Treaty of 1959 formally designated the frozen continent as a region of peace, devoted to science. However, it's difficult to overlook anything that anyone who has studied the maps or carefully read the fine print will discover. Large areas designated as restricted zones, where entry is either completely prohibited or restricted. That, of course, begs the question, why are there no-go zones and restricted aviation paths if Antarctica is genuinely just a tranquil research preserve? In actuality, there are hardly any commercial flights over Antarctica. International routes never traverse South America directly. Instead, they always veer around South Africa, Australia, or South America. Aviation safety is cited as the official explanation. Unreliable communications, no backup airports, and extremely frigid temperatures. However, a lot of people contend that contemporary aviation is more than capable of managing these difficulties. What is the reason behind airlines' continued disregard for Antarctica as a blank region on the map? Flights for passengers are just one example. Even scientific research is strictly regulated. Blurred locations, missing data, or zones that are just not accessible to the general public are frequently depicted on satellite maps. No-fly corridors, areas where aircraft are not permitted to land or pass, have been identified by independent researchers as being drawn throughout the continent. According to official claims, these safeguard delicate ecosystems. However, such logic just serves to increase public skepticism. Does this have more to do with protecting the environment or with keeping secrets hidden beneath the ice? According to the most widely accepted theory, these restricted areas hide items that the public shouldn't see. Nazi wartime bases, historic buildings buried under the ice, or even state-of-the-art military experiments conducted by modern superpowers in flagrant defiance of the Antarctic Treaty itself. Satellite photos that occasionally appear online before being swiftly taken down are adding fuel to the fire. Some seem to depict enormous black openings that resemble cave entrances, or sharply edged geometric formations that contrast sharply with the ice. For adherents of Agartha or Hollow Earth, these are entry points to a subterranean realm protected by access bans used by global powers. The pictures continue to imply to more realistic minds that Antarctica might not be completely deserted, but rather concealing vital resources or infrastructure. When contrasted to expeditions from the 20th century, the limited zone map becomes even more dubious. Numerous teams were permitted to venture far into the interior before being compelled to return close to specific coordinates. Some scientists have gone so far as to publicly acknowledge that they were not allowed to enter sensitive areas and were not allowed to publish data from there. People question if environmental preservation is a front for such control. In this way, Antarctica is like an unsolved mystery, but the true objective is to conceal discoveries. The parts that are visible are quite apparent, yet important parts are purposefully obscured. Every restricted area and flight corridor that is blocked turns into a blank canvas that piques curiosity. And because of those voids, innumerable theories have been developed, making Antarctica one of the most enigmatic and mythical locations in contemporary history. Many people believed that the Antarctic Treaty would turn the frozen continent into a symbol of complete peace, with only climate research stations and silent scientific outposts. However, reality turned out to be much more nuanced. Antarctica entered the scene as a silent battlefield during the Cold War. As tense as Berlin or Cuba, it is a theater of shadow conflicts. Antarctica's distinctive topography, situated at the southern pole of the planet, spanning a massive sheet of ice, and being close to vital transpolar flight paths, made it an ideal location for observation for both the US and the USSR. The placement of radar or missile systems at the South Pole carried significant strategic weight in a time when nuclear war seemed imminent. From this location, a station could keep an eye on submarines and airplanes in the South Pacific and South Atlantic. On paper, the research stations were devoted to biology, geology, and climate. However, many onlookers had a suspicion that those unassuming, scientific-looking structures were actually secret intelligence facilities that were monitoring satellites, intercepting radio transmissions, and even testing classified military technology. Satellite antennas, radar towers, and reinforced bunkers carved out of the ice started to show up. Were they really for weather information, Or was there a much larger purpose? The number of so-called international research facilities in Antarctica increased between the 1960s and the 1980s. However, this collaboration frequently resembled camouflage. There were rumors that the United States had placed sonar arrays under the ice to monitor Soviet submarines cruising the Southern Ocean. In the meantime, it was thought that the Soviets had equipped their stations with space monitoring apparatus in order to record signals from American satellites. The images seemed to the public as happy scientists wearing bright white parkas. However, a covert surveillance conflict was taking place beneath the surface. Persistent rumors of underground bases contributed to some of the mystery. Both superpowers were said to have dug up enormous complexes beneath the ice, command centers, weapons depots, and research facilities. Deep beneath the Antarctic ice sheet, explorers reportedly reported tunnels so large that trucks could fit through them. The existence of subterranean facilities, such as the Amundsen Scott Station, demonstrated that large-scale construction under the ice was feasible, even though official sources never verified such claims. Thenofly zones that started to arise during this time period further increased suspicion. Curiously, several of these restricted regions intersected with important research sites, despite their official purpose of protecting delicate ecosystems. Skeptics saw this as no accident. In defiance of the treaty that proclaimed Antarctica a country of peace, these were the locations where covert military exercises were taking place. The weapons race was at an all-time high by the 1980s. In addition to space's defense projects like the notorious Star Wars program, laser technology and directed energy weapons were also being investigated. According to some beliefs, Antarctica was the ideal testing area since it was remote, quiet, and simple to conceal from the public. The evidence would be buried by the ice itself if something went wrong. Antarctica was never merely a meteorological outpost during the Cold War in this sense. It was a covert battleground where military aspirations and scientific research collided, where the deeper layers of the ice revealed intricate games of power, while the public only viewed the surface. Together with the continent's stringent constraints, the strict silence surrounding these bases made Antarctica a massive black box of contemporary history. Then, despite the end of the Cold War, that black box remained unopened. The ancient secrets remained. They just heaped new ones on top of them. Because Antarctica is more than just a tale of politics and military strategy in the modern world. Something unfamiliar is now taking place there. Unidentified light streaks, inexplicable celestial signals, and pilot and researcher sightings of UFOs. The ice and the sky appear to blend into a silent performance, marking the start of a new era of Antarctic mystery. Pilots flying close to the southern pole have reported one of the most often repeated tales numerous people claimed to have seen. Lights flashing across the sky at unthinkable speeds and moving in ways that no plane could. Occasionally, they would fly in formation and emerge in bunches before quickly disappearing. Although these papers were rarely released to the public, they were privately discussed among the scholarly and military sectors. Antarctica became the ultimate covert location for extraterrestrial activities for UFO enthusiasts. Strange occurrences have even been recorded by research stations. There is no natural explanation for the dazzling halos that scientists at the Amundsen Scott facility reported extending across the sky for hours. Occasionally, instead of the typical auroras that one might anticipate, blue or silvery white rays emerged. Strange noises, including a low hum that seemed to emanate from the sky itself, were even reported to accompany the lights. The public hardly ever heard of these stories, and when they did, they were promptly written off as unknown atmospheric phenomena. A group of Argentine pilots claimed to have seen strange flying objects close to Antarctica in 1965, making it one of the most contentious incidents. They spoke about orange lights that raced at unfathomable speeds before launching themselves straight into the sky and disappearing. Newspapers in South America carried the tale, and it is still one of the most well-known UFO cases from Antarctica. The characteristics of Antarctica itself make it more difficult to reject these reports. There aren't many unidentified bystanders here who could misinterpret what they observe. Pilots, scientists, military officers, and other skilled people make every flight and observation. The silence is still overwhelming, though. Why, if they actually saw these things, were the reports never publicly examined? Were they imprisoned for reasons of national security? Or did they encounter something incomprehensible to humans? Not every explanation, of course, suggests aliens. Some scientists argue that the lights might represent anomalous polar atmospheric phenomena or ice reflections. However, the speed, the synchronized movement, and the abrupt disappearances that the witnesses reported were not explained by these explanations. And where did these mysterious craft originate from? In an area where there is almost no civilian activity, and every flight is recorded and cleared. The answer is closer to home for conspiracy theorists. They contend that top-secret aviation technology may be tested in Antarctica. Some people think that the major powers have tried flying disc-shaped planes here, technology that may have been influenced by Nazi World War II research. When scientists or pilots happen to catch a glimpse of them, they are dismissed as odd lights, a handy way to hide secrets. The ground and the ice beneath it are undergoing a more subdued revolution. If the sky over Antarctica used to astonish people with its odd lights and unexplainable phenomena, the change in the climate of Earth, a frozen world that seemed to last forever, Antarctica has long been associated with permanency. However, in the last few decades, that old ice has started to melt and shatter, exposing hitherto undiscovered things to civilization. The rate of Antarctic ice melt, entire cities' worth of icebergs break off and float into the ocean. This is more than just a sea level warning. Additionally, it serves as a gateway to underground lakes, buried sediments, and secret valleys that have been hidden for millions of years. Several arid valleys that were once enclosed by ice sheets are gradually coming to light. Landscapes believed to have vanished during the cold era. Every time the ice recedes, Antarctica unveils a new piece of its incredible history, which astounds scientists. Pollen, petrified plants, and even insect remnants have been found in Thebering strata. Evidence indicates this continent used to be a verdant forest with temperate temperatures and diverse habitats. The remains of marine life found in other sediment levels provide proof that when Antarctica was a part of the supercontinental, it was more than just a forest. It was previously connected to enormous oceans. Among the most astounding findings are subglacial lakes, water bodies buried under thousands of meters of ice. We now know that there are hundreds of these lakes because of ice melting and ice getting through radar. The most well-known is Lake Vostok, a realm that has been in complete darkness for millions of years, and where scientists are hoping to discover undiscovered life forms. Reaching and researching these lakes is becoming more possible as the ice continues to melt, which piques interest. What kind of life, if any, is there down there, microbial or something more complex? Odd geological formations have also been exposed by melting ice. Massive mountain ranges that extend hundreds of kilometers beneath the ice have been photographed by satellites. In several locations, the terrain exhibits precisely straight lines that resemble man-made cuts. Some people believe that these resemble the ruins of an old civilization that has been buried beneath time and ice rather than geology. According to mainstream science, these are natural formations brought about by tectonic movements. However, many people are still skeptical that nature could have carved such forms so neatly due to their geometric accuracy. Therefore, melting glaciers and climate change present both a threat and an opportunity. They are both a warning because they jeopardize world peace, and an opportunity because they might finally unlock secrets that have been kept hidden for millions of years. Nevertheless, the paradox is evident. The more Antarctica is revealed, the more tightly information is controlled. Research data is frequently kept secret, and only bits are made available. Sometimes satellite photos are blurry or disappear. It seems like things too delicate to discuss are also coming out of the ice, in addition to lakes and fossils. For this reason, a lot of people think that Antarctica's melting isn't only a natural occurrence. It resembles the gradual drawing back of a curtain. It may also conceal facts that the world is not yet prepared to confront, in addition to Earth's lost past. Now, the question is not only how quickly the ice is melting, but also what will be seen after it is gone. However, not all of what Antarctica has to offer is natural. In addition to the mysteries revealed by time and climate, there are also mysteries that are directly related to individuals, such as mysterious disappearances and expeditions that disappeared below the ice, leaving unanswered questions. The 20th and 21st century disappearances highlight more serious issues than the early 19th century missions, where tragedy could be attributed to a lack of technology. Why do people still disappear without a trace in the face of contemporary science and sophisticated equipment? Aircraft crashes are among the most talked about occurrences. Pilots, both military and civilian, reported odd occurrences while flying close to Antarctica in the 1960s and 1970s. According to reports, some flights vanished from radar in a matter of seconds and were never heard from again. Despite extensive search efforts involving whole fleets, the wreckage was never found. A lot of it might be explained by harsh weather, blizzards, strong winds, and broken ice fields. However, several tales describe abrupt, inexplicable communications interference, as though every signal was shut off by an unseen force. Many people thought that sounded more like electromagnetic anomalies, or even the potential for interference from covert bases than like weather. Pilots weren't the only ones. There are terrifying tales about ground expeditions as well. In one instance, a group was captured on camera departing a study facility to examine a section of ice. No one came back after several days. Rescue workers discovered only pieces, partially set up tents, abandoned tools, and lengthy drag marks in the snow, suggesting that the team had fled in fear. The specifics mirrored the notorious Dyatlov Pass tragedy in the Ural Mountains of Russia, although the official record reported them as missing under difficult conditions, an additional enigma that has never been fully resolved. There were even more sinister cases. There have been reports of scientists leaving some research stations to inspect equipment and never coming back. A few hundred yards from safety, several disappeared. Nothing was found during helicopter searches, as if the never-ending white had completely engulfed them. Oddly, these incidents hardly ever made news around the world, and when they did, the reports were short, swiftly ended, and rapidly forgotten. The harshness of Antarctica itself, abrupt storms, concealed ice crevasses, or deadly cold that can kill in a matter of minutes, are frequently cited by officials as explanations. Conspiracy theorists, however, interpret the disappearances as controlled information rather than natural phenomena. Radar logs and communication information disappeared with the victims in a number of incidents. Some claim that these individuals' disappearance was not an accident and that they happened upon something they were never supposed to witness. Antarctica is the ultimate setting, where the impossible can occur covertly because of its pristine silence and capacity to hide anything. Furthermore, the continent's shady reputation is further made worse by these disappearances. They give us the unsettling impression that something, whether visible or invisible, is constantly present to protect whatever is hidden beneath the ice. Not only do disappearance stories make us uneasy, they pose a more significant query. What is so important to conceal that it costs lives? Why do statistics and reports frequently disappear along with the victims if they are only natural accidents? And why is there such a rush to seal the files if they are just regular tragedies? There is another truth that is equally hidden beneath the legends of missing explorers that continue to loom large over history. The abundance of natural resources in Antarctica is astounding. Geologists have found rare minerals, natural gas, and oil beneath its enormous ice sheet resources capable of changing the global economy's equilibrium. And many contend that this could be the true cause of Antarctica's long history of strict security. Antarctica contains substantial coal deposits that were created when the continent was previously covered in lush forests under a considerably warmer climate, according to geological research conducted in the 20th century. However, coal is only the outermost layer. Scientists started finding evidence of natural gas and oil as deep drilling technology and ground-penetrating radar improved. According to some estimations, Antarctica's gas reserves might compete with those of Qatar or Russia, while its oil reserves could match those of the Middle East. Furthermore, it doesn't end there. Iron, copper, gold, uranium, and even rare earth elements are thought to be abundant in Antarctica, the beating heart of contemporary technology. Batteries, phones, computers, and particularly sophisticated military equipment all require these metals. Whoever has control over those resources has a strategic advantage in the high-tech era of today. However, the 1959 Antarctic Treaty and the 1991 Madrid Protocol effectively locked Antarctica away due to the size and fragility of that hidden wealth, prohibiting resource extraction for at least 50 years. Protecting the delicate environment was the stated justification. Indeed, the ecosystem of Antarctica is extremely fragile, and even minor disruptions can have a lasting impact. However, from a geopolitical perspective, it is difficult to accept that the world's superpowers would merely abandon such a treasure for environmental reasons. The Antarctic Treaty was essentially a means of freezing interests, according to analysts. The superpowers decided to postpone a resource war until the time was appropriate, rather than jumping right in. Meanwhile, they conduct surveys in secret, charting the geology and identifying mineral resources and oil fields. The country with the most data will be in the lead when the moratorium eventually ends. The most obvious instances date back to the 1970s and 1980s, when significant geological surveys were conducted by both the US and the USSR in order to determine resource potential. They bored deep to gather sediment samples under the aegis of science. Although leaks suggested that there were many, the majority of those in-depth reports were never released to the public. China has made significant investments in Antarctic research stations in recent years, using subterranean surveying equipment with very similar objectives. It is difficult to view Antarctica as the peaceful land that is often depicted because of this resource factor. It feels more like a huge vault filled with riches that is securely locked, with each superpower keeping a spare key that is just waiting to be used. Opening the vault might only be a matter of time when the globe experiences an energy crisis, or when resource management turns into a survival issue. Conspiracy theories find fresh fodder here. The tight information control, no-fly lanes, and restricted zones may be used to conceal geological data in addition to safeguarding ancient secrets, if Antarctica really is that wealthy. Some even think that small-scale experimental extraction has already occurred, but the results have been kept under wraps to prevent international conflict. Then, resources might be the greatest tangible clue to the mystery of Antarctica. Ancient legends, hollow earth theories, and UFOs all exist in the realm of fantasy. However, minerals, oil, and gas may be measured, quantified, and contested, and they might be the most obvious explanation for why Antarctica has been kept closed off for decades, protected like an undiscovered treasure trove. Another question is if the people who decide to visit Antarctica think the enormous wealth concealed beneath its ice is sufficient to keep countries wary yet never turn a blind eye. Not just scientists, not even regular tourists, but politicians, religious leaders, astronauts, and other influential people and world icons. And each time one of them appears, a flood of inquiries is triggered. How could they be drawn to this freezing, desolate land where there are no cities, no permanent inhabitants, and, officially, nothing to see? When former U.S. Secretary of State John Kerry unexpectedly traveled to Antarctica on the day of the U.S. presidential election in 2016. It was one of the most talked about trips. Speculation was stoked only by the timing. Why, at such a crucial juncture, would one of Washington's most influential individuals fly to the most remote and desolate part of the world? The official response was either climate change or her personal experience of its effects. Skeptics countered that there were many other locations that needed such a visit much more urgently. Kara's journey is still mysterious because of the quiet surrounding his schedule and the fact that many facts were never made public. Pope John Paul II was another unexpected visitor to Antarctica years earlier. His arrival on the White Continent was characterized as a symbolic act of peace. However, as with all symbols, there are numerous ways to interpret it. According to some, the Pope hoped that the unspoiled wilderness on Earth would serve as a living example of God's creation. In a land already controlled by political and scientific forces, others speculated that the visit was an attempt to establish a spiritual claim. From a religious standpoint, Antarctica might be viewed as the last remaining representation of purity, or possibly as a location connected to theological secrets that have never been revealed. Buzz Aldrin, the renowned astronaut, and the second man to set foot on the moon, added to the mystery. Aldrin visited Antarctica but abruptly left because of health problems. The trip was made more bizarre by a mysterious note he posted and then took down. "All of us are at risk." It is purely malevolent. His actual meaning is unknown. However, those comments held a terrifying weight for a man who had stood on the moon and looked at Earth from orbit. Did he witness something in Antarctica that will never be shared with the world? Furthermore, it doesn't stop there. Over the years, military leaders, millionaires, and politicians have all paid unexpected covert visits. They rarely discuss their motivations and frequently have hurried schedules. Many people think that the purpose of these excursions is to examine classified discoveries, anything from bizarre geological formations beneath the ice to enormous fossils. Others go farther, arguing that Antarctica is now used by the world's elite as a sort of private meeting place, a place far enough away that the world must never hear what is being said. Just by appearing, these influential people demonstrate that Antarctica is not a place that is deserted. Not at all. It appears to have layers of theological, scientific, political, and possibly even unimaginable meaning. The true question is not only what they saw there, but also why, upon returning, they all decided to remain silent. Furthermore, there are instances when silence communicates louder than words ever could. Antarctica has become a fertile field for countless theories as a result of its quiet. Is it possible that the ice contains traces of a vanished civilization? Or is modern technology so deeply ingrained that humanity isn't prepared to deal with it? Alternatively put, is it only a strategic resource vault, secrets that could upset the global power balance if they are made public too soon? The management of information has been a recurring topic in Antarctica's history, running alongside its expeditions, scientific discoveries, and several bizarre beliefs. No other location on the planet is both enshrouded in such stringent levels of control and honored as the shared heritage of humanity. Every public piece of information, published map, and downloaded satellite image appears to have gone through an unseen filter. And because of this authority, Antarctica has become a special area where secrecy and power coexist. The signatories to the Antarctic Treaty have made a public commitment to committing the continent to science and peace since the 1950s. But in addition to that promise, they erected legal obstacles. Every piece of data and study must go through the proper channels. Nobody has the authority to independently publish or conduct research. As a result, science in Antarctica has shifted from being about free knowledge to becoming a diplomatic tool where every piece of information has political significance. This control manifests itself in more subdued forms for the general people. In certain places, satellite images are frequently blurry. Publicly available maps typically only cover the most accessible regions, leaving big gaps where uncertainties persist. Rarely are complete scientific reports made public. Rather, they only promote findings that are safe for publications. Data from deep core drilling or raw radar scans, which could provide insight into what's actually beneath the ice, are rarely used. The more you examine it, the more obvious it is that this goes beyond simple security. It has to do with power, because reality itself is controlled by whoever has the information. A big powers claim that Antarctica is made up entirely of ice and microbes becomes the accepted reality. There are discoveries that tell a completely different story, even though they are hidden away in restricted databases. Power flourishes precisely in the space between the truth that is revealed to us and the truth that is concealed. Conspiracy theories have always flourished in Antarctica because of this. The more that is concealed, the more the imagination fills. The gap, it is not considered a glitch when a satellite image is blurry. It is regarded as a covert base. A missing expedition isn't caused by a snowfall. It turns into external interference. Ironically, these ideologies have only survived because of the very act of restricting knowledge. Antarctica might be evidence of a more profound conundrum. Sometimes the fact that we are not permitted to know is the true secret, not what actually exists. The message sent by a single piece of censored data is more significant than the data itself. Something that you're not supposed to see. Curiosity, suspicion, and the countless stories surrounding this country of ice are sparked by that message more so than by the secret reality itself. Building bases and extracting resources aren't the only ways to gain power here. It involves managing the boundary between what is visible and what is hidden. And with all of its ice covered by political layers, Antarctica has turned into the ideal illustration of the relationship between secrecy and power. However, this is neither a 20th nor a 21st century invention. Historically, Antarctica has been more imagined than explored, as evidenced by ancient stories and maps. Existing in the tension between what we can see and what we are never permitted to see may be its actual nature. And for that reason, it still fascinates us and compels us to ask questions long after the answers have been locked away. The future of Antarctica could degenerate into conflict if information control is the curtain that conceals the continent now. The energy war. With its enormous frozen richness, Antarctica cannot stay unexplored in a world that is becoming more and more resource-hungry every year, and where oil deposits, gas reserves, and rare minerals have turned into crucial negotiating chips. Geological investigations conducted in the 20th century already suggested that sediment records, dating back hundreds of millions of years, are hidden beneath miles of ice. Coal, oil, and natural gas are all evident in those sediments. Unofficial estimates have even drawn comparisons between the Middle East and Antarctica's potential reserves. It's a big assertion, but not wholly unjustified. The map of the continents Subterranean resources becomes more lucid as radar technology advances and can now see deeper through the ice. When and who will use the resources first are the new questions, rather than if they exist at all. All exploitation is currently prohibited under the Madrid Protocol and the Antarctic Treaty. These agreements, however, are only short-term. When conventional oil fields run out and the world faces a full-blown energy crisis, the question of whether or not to drill will no longer be up for debate. Which country gets to drill first will determine this. There is already a silent race going on, using science and data rather than weaponry. Whoever has the most thorough maps of the reserves of petrol and oil, the game will be dominated by whoever develops the technology to drill and transport in such harsh conditions as soon as the restriction ends. And the battle for energy is not just about petrol and oil. Rich amounts of rare minerals, cobalt, lithium, and rare earth elements, the components of batteries, renewable energy, and contemporary weapons are thought to exist in Antarctica. In a time when green energy is being heralded as the answer, the control of these scarce resources will determine the course of international enterprise. All of those technologies still rely on limited minerals, no matter how much the world talks about solar, wind, and hydrogen power. Furthermore, Antarctica might be the final large, unexplored mine. Because of this, many people fear that Antarctica may turn into the new, more hazardous Middle East, because exploitation here could trigger an environmental disaster in addition to a geopolitical confrontation. Every pipeline and drill hole has the potential to upset the delicate ecosystem's balance. Furthermore, the damage wouldn't be localized once the ice started to melt. Sea levels, climatic systems, and the survival of millions of people globally would all be impacted. However, this is precisely the reason why Antarctica might end up being the battleground where morality and power clash. Drilling could be justified by great powers citing global energy relief. They may present it as a remedy for the food crisis, fuel shortages, or even climate change. Environmental groups will counter by stating that using Antarctica for commercial purposes would be like opening a Pandora's box with irreversible effects. At this point, Antarctica's actual significance becomes evident. It's more than just a distant continent. The future of humanity might be decided there. Antarctica will become a global chessboard rather than the land of peace if its riches are turned into a prize. The upcoming energy war might start with treaties, technology, and how well each side can persuade the public of its position rather than with gunfire. The winner will be whoever controls the narrative of extraction for the benefit of humanity. Therefore, Antarctica is more than just the memory of Earth preserved in old ice. It might be the future of Earth, too. Will we be saved when humanity eventually opens that frozen vault? That is the true question. Or will we start a new cycle of conflict, ambition, and environmental destruction? It would be as though three hands were firmly holding the curtain if we thought of Antarctica as a mysterious place. Religion, science, and the military. At the planet's southernmost edge, three seemingly distinct and come together. Each of them has a piece of the key, and when combined, they create a triangle of power that both guards and conceals Antarctica's darkest secrets. This ice continent is illuminated, at least on the surface, by science. Its temperature, wildlife, and geology are being studied by thousands of experts from around the world at research stations. In Antarctica, however, science is not totally free. Through international conventions, it is organized, distributed, and overseen. Only tidbits of information are made public. All discoveries must be reported through formal means. Radar data penetrated the ground, and core samples were drilled well below the ice. Seldom doth he show up in full. Science has turned into a filter that only shows humanity what is intended to be seen, rather than opening doors to hidden truths. The military is the steel underneath the guise of science. Antarctica has been constantly monitored since the Cold War. Restricted flying routes, redacted areas on maps, and military bases masquerading as research stations all allude to the military's covert presence. The idea that Antarctica has always been on the strategic radar of the superpowers was strengthened by operations like high jump and rumours of Nazi underground bases. Although the deployment of weaponry here is officially prohibited by international accords, few people genuinely think the military has left this strategically important area, one that is situated immediately beneath the network of international surveillance satellites at the intersection of three oceans. Religion, the third point of the triangle, may seem surprising, yet there is no denying its impact. The public's perception of Antarctica has been influenced by religion. From the Pope's symbolic visit to religious interpretations of the region as the last unspoiled territory, the voice of faith has occasionally served to justify silence, and some theologians view Antarctica as a symbol of the beginning or themed, where cosmic mysteries may be kept. Myth and belief are used to fill the gaps left by science and politics. As a result, the triangle of religion, science, and the military does more than just coexist. It maintains itself by mutual support and restraint. The rational framework that makes control acceptable is provided by science. Because of the military's strict vigilance and the mythology that religion fosters, Antarctica is not only a geographical continent, but also a spiritual symbol that is inaccessible. These three sharpened points work together to do more than just keep things secret. They give secrecy longevity, because the secret lies in the silent cooperation of numerous powers rather than in the possession of any only organization. The hidden realities of Antarctica, as seen through this triangle of power, go beyond subglacial lakes and oil riches. The variability to influence human understanding is hidden. Humanity's perception of the Earth itself can be shaped by whoever defines Antarctica as a land of ice, a storehouse of resources, or a mirror of the cosmos. Throughout history, Antarctica has acted as a massive ice mirror, reflecting the most profound human obsessions. This location has had significance that goes much beyond geography, since the ancient Greek and Chinese geographers first conjured up the idea of an undiscovered southern land, or auralis incognita. The idea was that the world needed to be balanced, with symmetrical land in the south. It was the imaginary world where exotic peoples or gods might reside. Antarctica was already a representation of the unknown, of humanity's curiosity and apprehension about the blank spots on maps before it was even found. The desire to conquer was another preoccupation that Antarctica reflected when the age of exploration began. Humanity's ambition to demonstrate its strength against nature's most formidable face was demonstrated by the race between Amundsen and Scott and the sacrifices made during Shackleton's missions. However, those catastrophes also served as a reminder of our frailty. Humans, no matter how developed, are vulnerable to bone-crushing winds and interminable snow. With icy serenity, Antarctica retorted, "We were never the absolute masters of Earth." As the shadow of war grew during the 20th century, Antarctica represented a different kind of control, power, and passion. Rumors of secret bases, restricted airspace, and covert military operations all made it a strategic tool. It was designated a land for peace and science in 1959 by the Antarctic Treaty. However, it also made Antarctica inaccessible, a location where information was censored and silence itself was used as a show of might. Although no nation actually held the southern pole, humanity could not help but use it as a politic. Even at the furthest reaches of the planet, Antarctica is becoming a reflection of the world's fear of survival. The globe looks to Antarctica with dread rather than just curiosity as ice sheets break and sea levels rise. Every glacier that melts and every river that is concealed behind the ice is a warning sign. Antarctica now functions as more than just a repository for Earth's history. It now serves as a timepiece for the future of humanity. Above all, Antarctica is a reflection of our knowledge gaps. We've merely touched the surface after centuries of research. There is an unexplored planet beneath miles of ice. For millions of years, lakes were walled off. Microorganisms that are unique, geological formations that have the power to alter Earth's history. Each new finding raises a new query, as if Antarctica never fails to surpass human imagination. The secrets of Antarctica, however, are not merely natural. They are also found in the way we handle the truth. Part of it is hidden by science, and part of it is illuminated. While they protect and guard, the military also impose restrictions. It has meaning because of religion, but it also makes quiet acceptable. Because of this triangle of power, authority, belief, and truth are all intertwined in Antarctica and cannot be separated. This could be the reason Antarctica is more than just a continent. It is Earth's final representation of the unknown. Antarctica is one of the few remaining places that humanity cannot completely dominate. A land that is both close-marked on maps and observed by satellite sand far away is inaccessible, a sonotherplanot, a place that has been scientifically detailed but is nevertheless shrouded in mystery, obscurity, and myth. Perhaps what Antarctica teaches us is not what is under the ice, but rather how to deal with uncertainty. It serves as a reminder of human limitations, that not all secrets are intended to be revealed. And sometimes there is significance in stillness itself. In addition to being a treasure trove, Antarctica teaches us about humility, boundaries, and the cost of ambition. Perhaps there are still unanswered questions as we come to the finish of this adventure. Perhaps, though, that is the point. Antarctica is the ultimate mystery, since there are no answers. It doesn't give us the truth. It makes us wonder. The silence is not filled by it. It compels us to think. Antarctica is quiet in a world full of noise. And the most potent message it conveys to humanity may be that quiet. The last secret on Earth, Antarctica, is still a mystery to us. Listening, thinking, and acknowledging that not everything belongs to humanity is more important than conquering. Thank you for joining Secret Historian on this extraordinary journey into the warnings left behind by those who vanished. If you believe, the past still holds wisdom. If you know deep down that history was never a sleep only, waiting, subscribe now to Secret Historian.